Welcome to Rev Up Your Business with Hilda Gann. We are now in season 5, and we've changed the name and the focus of the podcast. Rev Up Your Business is the podcast for small to medium-sized business owners, entrepreneurs, and HR professionals. Each week, we share tips, strategies, and trends on how you can build success in your business. I share my expertise as a people-centric leader in work culture and human resources. My guests share their expertise in human resources, marketing, sales, finance, IT, leadership, and the multiple facets that you need to take care of your business. If you love to learn and want to find out how you can rev up your business, join us. Welcome to another episode of Rev Up Your Business. Today, we're going to talk about self-confidence. My guest is Sheena Yap Chan, and she is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of her book that just came out recently, The Tao of Self Confidence. She's a keynote speaker, a consultant, and an award-winning podcast on leadership and self-confidence. We are in for a treat. She's also the founder and host of the award-winning podcast called The Tao of Self Confidence, no surprise, where she interviews Asian women about their journey to self-confidence. Her podcasts have gotten over 1 million downloads to date, and she has interviewed over 800 women on the topic of confidence. She has interviewed celebrities, 8-figure CEOs, even myself, and many more. Sheena has been featured on Mind Valley, Fox, Thrive Global, Manila Times, and many more. She's also the co-author of international best-selling books called Asian Women Who Boss Up and The International Women of Color Who Boss Up. Sheena debuted a book with Wiley, The Tao of Self Confidence, a guide to moving beyond trauma and awakening the leader within. And it's not only a Wall Street Journal bestseller, but it's also Publisher's Weekly bestseller. Wow, what a bio, Sheena. And you were interviewed by me a few seasons ago, and you've just continued to just build on your journey and your journey towards self-confidence.
Yeah, first off, thank you so much, Hilda, for having me again on your amazing podcast. It's always a blast to connect with you, whether it's in person or even on a podcast like this. We've been, more than just colleagues, we're friends. We've been going out to dinners and hanging out with other women from the Boss Up book. So I'm just really honored to be here again today.
Well, thank you, Sheena. We actually started our acquaintance together through the Asian Woman Who Boss Up, where I wanted to actually be in it, but it was already all the women that were going to be in that book were in it. So I'm going to proudly show that I bought The Asian Woman Who Boss Up because it is a book to read, and these books are about women and their stories. So then I had to be in my own book, right? So I'm in the chapter book called Women Who Boss Up Post-Pandemic. So I am so excited to have you as a guest today and have you back, because you have taken that Woman Who Boss Up book and you have exploded. Tell us a little bit about your journey to this book, The Tao of Self Confidence.
Yeah, it's really surreal to have a book that's published by one of the top 5 publishers in the world. I mean, I never thought that would ever happen to me, not because I believed it like that. It's not because that I didn't believe in myself. It was more because I was really happy that I had Asian women who boss up that really represented Asian women in a better light, in a stronger representation that really um, dismantles the negative stereotypes we go through. And as I was promoting it, someone from the publisher saw it and asked me to speak for one of their events. And after that, it led to asking if I wanted to work with them as an author. And at first I was like, are you sure you want me to write a book about Asian women and leadership in particular? I mean, I mean, I'm always learning. I still don't know everything. And I was scared too, right? Like imposter syndrome comes in and you're like, who are you to write a book? Like, what do you know? Like, what did you go to school for? Like, all that stuff started rushing, right? And then I realized I have to do this, not just for me, but for every single woman out there, every woman out there who's been underrepresented and feels like they don't have a voice. So I said yes, even though I had no clue what I was going to write about. I said yes. Wrote the book in less than 3 months, came out in May of earlier this year, and really just really grateful for everything it's done. And then I'll have a second book coming out in 2025 with the same publisher. So even that alone, I didn't expect. I was like, if I just have one book from this amazing publisher, my life is complete. I've basically done everything I could have ever wanted and more. And so for me, it was like, if this was the only book I ever write, I'm going to pimp it out like there's no tomorrow. I'm going to constantly talk about it. I'm going to showcase it everywhere because, as an Asian, like when you look at the publishing industry, it's still 75% Caucasian, right? Whether it's the authors, the literary agents, the employees, the big bosses. And when it comes to Asian authors, it's like next to nothing. So for me, it's like, if I can make a dent in that industry, then that's great. And it's funny because I have people in the community who are like, "Oh, Sheena paved the way for so many Asian authors to be picked up," and like I'm just like, I don't know if I'm the person because there's definitely more authors out there who paved the way. Like Amy Tan is like definitely
Joy Luck Co. Yeah.
of an amazing person. Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and people, I think sometimes people like dismisses having a self-published book. And I for me, if it wasn't a self-published book, and not even just my own book, a co-authored book, it wouldn't have led me to this moment. And even Robert Kiyosaki, believe it or not, he started with a self-published book, right? And look where he is today. He sold over 40 million copies, but everything started with that. People sometimes don't understand they need to start with something to just get there. Like a great story was the comedian Jokoi. He really wanted to put himself on the map. But in order for him to do that, he had to invest in taping his own special so he could shop it around for Netflix and all the big streaming industries. And at first, he Netflix actually told him, "Don't bother, like don't waste your money," right? And he's like, "No, I'm gonna show you. Well, even if I don't have money, I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna tape this Netflix special, and I'm gonna show you like this is bankable, right?" And believe it or not, Netflix bought it. They've actually, I think he's done like 4 Netflix specials with them, and sold out stadiums, got a movie out, and more, right? He has a book. He also has a successful podcast. So for me, it's like, don't ever dismiss where you came from, because if it wasn't for that moment, you wouldn't be here today.
And sometimes it's the stories that your journey and your story and sharing that journey with somebody that leads to things. You started you started the Tao of Self Confidence as a podcast. And I believe you're on episode 850 something or other.
873.
Thank you. Thank you for the number. Oh,
Yeah.
it's not too bad. Close, right?
Yeah.
So, how did you get started on that journey? Saying, I need to do this. I need to start a podcast. And, 100 later, I think, hey, I need to keep going on this. And I remember the day when I was doing some statistical analysis and I had been a guest on your podcast. And I went into this thing, I think it's called Listen Notes.
Yeah.
And it identified you as one of the top 10 or higher podcasters. And I thought, wow. And I sent you that statistics, and then you used it, as
Yeah.
well as our author, Tam Luck, who's also in that top 10 list. And you used it to say, hey, my podcast is in the top 10, so you got to listen to me, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
tell
yeah,
us
I know.
about
I remember
that.
that. It said that I had the top 0.5% like most listened podcasts globally, and I was like, "What?" It was crazy when you shared that, and I always share everything, right? And for me, sharing everything is showing others what's possible. It's not always about me; it's about the person who needs to believe in themselves, right? But in 2015, I just really wanted to create a platform, especially when it came to representation and showing better light of Asian women because we're constantly seen by our negative stereotypes. And I was also dealing with my own confidence issues. Like, I wasn't feeling good enough about myself. I second guessed myself. I wouldn't trust my intuition. I procrastinate like there's no tomorrow. I was scared. I resisted a lot. And I was looking for resources that really catered to Asian women's confidence, but there wasn't any. And that makes sense because we don't talk about what we go through. We keep everything inside, everything's repressed, right? And so decided I'll just start this podcast, and that was at a time when there was hardly any Asian people just podcasting. There's one guy from California who started a podcast highlighting the, Asian community. And I said to myself, well, there's that one guy. If he's doing it, I'm going to do it too. And just kind of went for it. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. I still resisted. I still went through all these different thoughts in my head, but I realized too, if I wanted to have the representation I craved for, it really had to start with myself. So I started it, didn't know what I was doing, reached out to a lot of people, got ghosted, rejected, went through all kinds of confidence issues, even though I had a podcast on confidence, right? Um, and just kept pushing for it. Like the first 5 years, I didn't even know what to do with it. Like, I didn't monetize on it. I didn't know what to do with it. And I was like, I must be the biggest loser because I'm doing something and I'm not showing anything for it. And there's times where I wanted to quit and just like not do it anymore. But I also realized like I'm building towards something. And, sometimes it might take some time. It can be a lot faster if we work on our confidence and work on how we perceive ourselves, especially as women. We tend to be our own worst enemy. And that really stops us, right? Especially when we want to be a perfectionist. We want to make sure we're 110% confident before we start something, not
Yeah.
realizing
Yeah.
you could be like 30% ready and just go for it. Be okay to make mistakes and you can just course correct along the way. I mean, I make a ton of mistakes. Like if I'm on LinkedIn sharing a post, my sister is already the grammar police and like, do you read what you write? Like, how did you become a writer? What is wrong? And I'm like, leave me alone. But you know what? I just edit whatever she said was wrong and then it's done. Like it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, because there's that edit feature, right? Yeah, we were talking about that the other day, and I said, "Oh yeah, I use Grammarly and Live," and she said, "My sister is my Grammarly." And I mean, we're both Asian, and we're talking about your Asian book and my COVID boss up book, but this isn't a session just for Asian women. It is for confidence in general. Now, you've talked about negative stereotypes a couple of times. Can you explain what is negative stereotypes for Asian women?
So, when it comes to negative stereotypes, Asian women are always seen as quiet, submissive, and obedient. We're seen as sex objects, instead of seen as leadership roles or management roles. If you look at the reports, Asian women have one of the lowest levels of leadership. And I that it was the sole reason why I even started writing the book, The Tao of Self Confidence, because it was like, why is it that we have one of the lowest leadership, numbers in leadership? Why is it that we're still constantly seen this way? And trauma is a huge factor in it. We go through all kinds of trauma, whether it's in our childhood, our marriage, our business, or personal lives. Um, you know, it's the thing that holds us back as women, right? And it's not just for Asian women. This is for most women. Maybe there's something traumatic that really stopped them from moving forward. Like for me, I failed kindergarten when I was 5 years old for coloring outside the lines. And for the longest time, I kept thinking I was such a failure because of what happened, right? Because of at 5 years old, I failed kindergarten. I had to redo kindergarten. I had to move to another school to redo kindergarten. And I mean, at 5 years old, that's just crazy.
For coloring outside the lines, right? Yeah, that certainly is impactful at that very early age.
Yeah. And, if we don't work through them, then is going to keep haunting us, right? And sometimes we're not even aware of the traumas we go through. And sometimes we're not, we're also carrying the traumas of our parents, our grandparents, our ancestors, especially when they migrate from different countries to Canada and America, right? They struggled, they had to literally start from scratch. They've gone through different things like racism, especially like in Asian culture, like the history in Canada, nobody understood how much we went through, right? The Chinese Exclusion Act, for once. Like, I think nothing is more racist than like barring someone from a country based on their cultural background.
And it is called the Exclusion Act, which you and I conversed last night. Is I forgot her name, Hannah Kim, I believe it is head of East Asian Studies, the library at U of T, and she is doing a commemorative on recognizing the 100 years of the Exclusion Act coming in. So think 1923, there was an Exclusion Act that forbid people of Chinese descent to come to Canada. And a lot of history for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, that was never taught in schools because it didn't look good, right? It didn't look good that Chinese people built the railroads for half the wages and very bad working conditions. And after that was done, they were shipped back to their country, right? Like, I mean, there's so many things we can dive on when it comes to history. And I think it's important to learn that because there's a lot of misconceptions as well, like during the height of COVID, when the Stop Asian Hate was happening. A lot of people think racism only happened during the pandemic, not realizing it's been happening for years. It's just nobody ever talked about it. And especially in our culture, we're told if something bad happens, we just keep it to ourselves. But that doesn't
And I think
help us.
I think too that was a product of that generation. Like when you think about current wars and how we talk about when people come back and the trauma that they've experienced, and we have PTSD. When people came back from World War One, when people came back from World War Two, regardless of their color, and I will note that there were Canadian Asians, Chinese fighting in both World War Two, which I knew about, and World War One. But people didn't talk about it, whether they're Asian or Caucasians. Nobody really talked about the trauma these people experienced post-war. And I think that's a product of that generation, that you just keep it to yourself and you just soldier on or carry on. So it's interesting. Thank you for sharing some of those doubts that you had when you first started the Tao of Self Confidence. And for those who are not Asian, Tao is a word that is of Asian origin. So what made you use that word, and what is Tao?
Yeah, I mean, funny story. When I first started my podcast, I was actually going to name it The Stripper and have a tagline of to strip your limiting beliefs away. So I hired someone to do the graphic for me. It was literally like a silhouette of a stripper with a whip. And I was also part of this podcast mastermind because back then I didn't even know what a podcast was. So I said, I'm going to learn, I'm going to invest and figure this out. And yeah, I shared that graphic in the mastermind, and 9 out of 10 said, I don't think you'll attract the right people. You might get the wrong audience. And I was like, oh my God, if I can't get this name right, like I'm already a failure. And so I had to like take a step back, get super clear. And as I was going through iTunes, because back then all the podcast was on iTunes, I saw a lot of podcasts that started with the art of. So like the art of business, the art of avocados, whatever, right? And I was like, oh, that's interesting, the art of. But then I was like, well, I don't want to say the art of because everyone else keeps using it. What am I going to use? So I think I saw the word Tao and what it meant. And, it means the way. It's like having flow and things like that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to use that. And then self-confidence came and I just put it together. And so when I had this graphic down here and shared it below with all the people, they were like, oh, that's way better. I can't wait to listen to it. I was like, yay.
Yes, there is a superwoman there. Yeah, because I think you would have attracted a different kind of audience. And I remember some of my female colleagues who are in the space of tantric, which is woman's, womb and womb thinking. And some of the words that they have to use, then they got excluded from Google because they were using words that were of sexual connotations and almost being cast out of being able to be in Google. So the stripper concept may not have had got to 871 episodes. So I'm glad you were in a group community helping you develop your podcast and that you're successful today. Now, you've talked to at least 871 people live on a podcast, but I know that you've been talking to people, just the nature of who you are. Can you share some of your observations of people in general, what we, do in terms of confidence, both in the lacking and how we build our self-confidence?
Yeah, I mean, everyone goes through imposter syndrome. Everybody, even men, there's men out there who lack self-confidence too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed, they may look confident, but, behind closed doors, they're second guessing themselves too. They're wondering, is this going to work? How are they going to, make stuff happen? And that's something as women we deal as well, right? Like, how are we going to make the next dollar? How are we going to make, put food on the table? Things like that. Imposter syndrome is something that everyone goes through, right? And I
Yeah.
realized in order, like, the best way to build self-confidence is to have a community, to have a support system. We don't have to do this alone. That's the biggest aha moment I've gotten, because sometimes I feel like I have to do everything myself and I get exhausted, I get burnt out. And honestly, the moment I took part in the Asian Women Who Boss Up book and be part of the Women Who Boss Up community, that's when I realized, like, oh, I don't have to do everything myself. Like, I can ask for help, and it's not shameful, because especially in Asian culture, everything is shameful. Asking for help is a sign of weakness. It's shameful, and it's like, it's exhausting. And as women, we should be collaborating all the time, working together, coming up with different ideas, like be okay to lift each other up and be each other's hype women. If you look at guys, like I remember going to this like breakfast networking at the Sheraton Hotel in downtown Toronto. And first off, I was the first girl there, so I was like, "Oh my gosh." But I was noticing how guys interact with each other, and it's really awesome because they literally like say hi to each other, they connect, they trade business cards, and once they're done, they're like, "Let's talk business." That simple, honestly. And I was like, "Wow." Like as women, we still like hold back a little bit. The trust factor isn't there. And I get it. For so long we've been like seen by society as pitting against each other. The media doesn't help when you have examples of like Angelina Jolie and Jennifer Aniston pining over one guy. Like that narrative needs to stop, right? Because it makes women look immature, right? They don't even talk about that, right? They're out there doing their own careers, doing their own thing. But for years, like the media would constantly be like, "Are you team Jolie Angelina? Are you team Jennifer?" Just those little things really stops us, right? And it's crazy that like even until this day, that narrative still pops up from time to time.
And it's very interesting because I learned very early. I had a friend, and I think as women we often have comparisonitis, and either we feel better than somebody else or inferior to somebody else. And this friend, who's still my friend, years later, we met in our second job together as educators, because that was our passion. We wanted to be educators in nursing. And that friendship grew to a point where anything she did, I was so happy for her, and vice versa. And I thought, wow, this is so much better than a comparisonitis type of thing. And it taught me in my 20s how to be more, enjoy people's relationships. And so today I find that I have very few people who I collaborate, work with, or consider friends who do not share the same kind of joy in uplifting each other and supporting each other and hearing the difficulties. I also remember during COVID, I was part of 3 communities. I had a coach that I was still part of, and we had group coaching. I enrolled in the Ella program, which is now a national program to help women entrepreneurs build their company. So suggest that people are interested, they check it out. And I forget the third one, but we met almost every week or 2 weeks. So I had 3 different support groups to help me. I did not feel alone. And I can only imagine how difficult it was during COVID for people who were, that they were it. They were their business, they were their community, and that would be really tough. So thanks for sharing your perspectives of what you're seeing out there, because it is that imposter syndrome. We all have it. And the funny thing about it is, I think you can be very successful, but when you get to the next rung, you now become an imposter in that new element. And so you don't think of it as I'm an imposter. Look at it the opposite way around, is how successful you are. And the analogy I draw is a little toddler. When they take their first steps, they look like, it looks funny because they're out of control and they fall. But then they master that speed. But are they satisfied with that speed? No, they start to walk at a faster speed and then they fall. So think of your journey as an entrepreneur, as a professional in your career, is that you're running faster than you probably feel you are in control, but you're doing good. But if you fall, just pick yourself up and start over again. You'll master that speed. You'll master that current challenges that you're having. So that's my tip and strategy for people. Just turn it around. Try to be more confident in yourself. Any highlights that you want to share besides the coloring outside the lines in terms of your journey to self-confidence?
Uh, I think it's really important to work on ourselves every single day. Confidence doesn't happen overnight. A lot of people think we have to take big leaps to create that confidence. I believe it's taking the small, actionable daily steps that will get you there. So, taking it one step at a time. You have to understand Rome wasn't built in a day, so you can't expect yourself the same. You can't expect
Mm-hmm.
yourself to have confidence on the first day you build it, right? Sometimes you just need 51% as a bare minimum and just build on top of that.
Just do it, right? And then
Yeah.
learn from that and grow. Share some of the highlights of your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the stats that really started the book was learning that in the United States, Asian women represented 2.7% in high C-suite roles in 2021, which to me was like crazy, because that number is so low. Just for women of color in general is low, but Asian women was one of the lowest. When you look at the number of Fortune 500 CEOs in a life within like 20 years, there was only been like 6 Asian women who are CEOs, which is like crazy, right? So like those numbers is what really got me thinking, like, why do we have such low numbers? What is going on? And so it's really a guide to kind of go from trauma to confidence, because uh, I've seen a lot of leadership books out there, and they're all like very rigid manuals, right? Nothing wrong with it, but we really have to like peel the layer of onions, right, to get to the root cause. Because if we don't get to that root cause, we're not going to show up as our best self. It's like, let's say you want to learn karate, but you keep telling yourself you're the worst kicker alive. So even though I show you how to kick properly, you're not going to do it because in your head, you're already telling yourself you're setting yourself up for failure. So it's really important to work through that, right? So like for me, I realized that me failing kindergarten wasn't a failure. I was always just meant to color outside the lines. And that means I was meant to do my own thing. I wasn't supposed to be in a box or what my culture tells me to do. And knowing that, I realized, oh, okay, so I'll always just do things my way, and it'll be different. And I think sometimes, especially in Asian culture, I know it's frowned upon, but imagine what we can do when we just go out there and color outside the lines, be able to do things that we want to do. Be an entrepreneur, be a creative, become a high-powered person in C-suite roles, be a lawyer, a doctor. I mean, sky's the limit. And so I just do my best to just color outside the lines, whatever that may look like, because there's no actual formula. Sometimes you just gotta go out there and test a few things, see what works, and just go for it.
Can you share some of your journey to gaining more confidence? You talked about when you started the podcast. How did you gain that confidence?
I mean, I love listening to all the women I've interviewed. It was it was those stories that really helped myself because I realized, oh, I wasn't the only one dealing with this. Other people deal with this too. So sometimes knowing that we go through similar struggles, it makes the journey a lot better knowing like, oh, okay, we're not the only ones. Like everyone goes through this and they were able to come out of it. So like if she's able to come out of it, then I have a chance. And that's why representation is important. That's why sharing our stories, being vulnerable is really important because especially in entrepreneurship, it can get lonely, right? Like, especially on social media, you see everyone like constantly like sharing all their achievements and accolades, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we look at her like, oh man, they're like flying high, and then there's me, right? Then you start feeling bad about yourself, and you go through this whole rabbit hole of like, oh man, I'm such a loser. I haven't done this yet, and they've been able. And we compare ourselves, right? We compare our chapter 1 to their chapter 20, and so
I like how
sometimes,
you said that. Your chapter 1 to their chapter 20. They've
yeah.
had 19 more chapters, so don't compare.
Yeah. And we all struggle. I mean, we still struggle today, of course, right? But I don't see that struggle as something negative. I see it as something positive because out of that struggle can come with so many opportunities that we can work on. So, I start to share some of the things I've been through. Like I've been rejected. There was a speaking engagement that I really wanted to do it, but I couldn't because of certain rules that I couldn't control. So, yeah, it's sometimes devastating, but at the same time, there's a lesson to be learned about this. And maybe I was just meant to share that, knowing like, hey guys, I still get ghosted. I still get rejected. I still make mistakes. I still feel imposter syndrome. Like we all do. And being able to share that helps people a lot better. They're like, oh, even she feels like that. I'm not the only one.
It is a journey. It is a journey. And I remember seeing you at Collision this year. And you said, hey, should I go? Should I not go? Yeah, I think I'll go. And I admired how you use that opportunity to talk about the Tao of Self Confidence, to connect with those media people. And your presence encouraged them to say, this story is special. And I'm going to ask her to come on the show. And there were so many software companies would have died to be in your spot to get a little vignette with whatever China News was or whatever even Toronto Star I think was one of them, and you just went there, you talked and you shared. And I think knowing you for the number of years that I know you, I saw how you've grown in your confidence and your, hey, nothing to lose, gonna try this. That's that out of the box coloring thing coming to you. Hey, nothing to lose for trying.
Yeah. And, it's not always easy. Like I still get scared. Uh, I'm like, oh my God, should I do this? Like, what if they think I'm stupid? I mean, I still get scared, but I learned to push through it and just go for it. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Like, I didn't die. I'm still here today.
Well, any final advice for those trying to gain confidence?
I think the most important advice I would give people is be okay to ask for help. I think that is the most important thing when it comes to your journey. Like, in this chapter, I think I probably said that like at the end of like every chapter, like be okay to ask for help, be okay to ask for help, because I want you to realize like it's okay, especially in our culture, like it's okay to ask for help. If we don't ask for help, we get stuck, right? We have a lot of blind spots that, of course, we can't see. They're blind spots for a reason, right? It's like when you're driving on the highway you have a rear view mirror because you want to be able to check your blind spots. So you should apply the same concept in life, whether it's to join a community, hire a coach, hire a consultant, talk to, a licensed psychiatrist, whatever, right? Like, be okay to ask for help. Be okay to have those second or third pair of eyes that can see your blind spots and correct it.
I had one more thought that I wanted you to share, and that's about, growing up as an Asian, there weren't very many role models of Asian descent. And I remember when the movie came out, I forgot the name of it now, but where Michelle Yeoh and the other person, which
Everything
you'll know,
everywhere,
yeah,
everything
everything,
everywhere, all.
and you use that opportunity to share it on social media. Can you give some highlights? I felt a sense of pride that we had arrived.
Oh my God, I was bawling like with joy because first of all, like Kiwi Kwan is like the best comeback story ever.
Oh
Imagine
yeah.
he starred in two big movies, fell off the face of the earth because there wasn't a lot of roles for Asian people back then, worked behind the scenes, then saw a movie called Crazy Rich Asians, got FOMO, called his friend to be his agent, and then he got the role of Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, what most people don't realize is that that movie was shot right before the lockdowns. So they just finished it, and then the lockdown happened. So, of course, everything was at a standstill. And he couldn't get an acting job during the pandemic. He lost his health insurance because I think in America, you have to work a certain number of months or a year, or there's a certain time in order to get the insurance. So he lost his health insurance. And yeah, he was, like, oh my God, what did I just do to myself? And like, he asked his agent, am I at least good in this movie? And he's like, yeah, don't worry, you're awesome. And look where he is today, right? He won an Oscar, he won an Emmy, he's in other movies. And every time I hear him talk or watch his interviews, I like cry because I understand his struggle. Like, I understand that struggle and what he went through, and like, I can totally relate to it. So to see him like succeed, like, and this is why representation is so important. To see him go from like 0 to 100 is like the best comeback story ever. And then Michelle Yeoh, right? Like, she's awesome, right? She's been in the industry for so long. Finally got her first Oscar, first Asian woman to win Best Actress, right? Like as for an Oscar. And she also started in her hometown, right? She was an actress in Asia before she came into Hollywood. And sometimes we start with what we know, right? And that's fine. Like, we should start with what we know. I don't know why we wouldn't. And then as we keep doing this work, it's going to expand, right? It's going to go and become bigger. So you look at Michelle Yeoh, she started in her home country, went to Hollywood. Now she's an Oscar, an Oscar-winning actress. Jackie Chan, also a really big star in Hong Kong, then came to Hollywood, became big, right? And that should be, and that's okay, right? Because I mean, I don't like, you do what you know, right? You do what feels good, you do what you know, and as you keep doing this, it's going to expand.
I love Michelle's story when somebody asks her, so what's it like to be a visible minority? And of course, she started in Asia, so that's not a visible minority. So she didn't understand this concept of visible minority. I'm visible, but I'm a majority in this world. I'm a majority.
Oh my God, don't even get me started with that word. Like, I don't even like to be called minority. I don't know what makes us minor. It's really like, I say underrepresented instead, because it really, like, that's what it really is. We're underrepresented, especially in a city like Toronto, very multicultural. You can get every cuisine in the world. Like, we should have a lot of like representation across the board.
I grew up in Toronto, so I am so used to this multicultural city that we have, never thinking that we all don't have a place here. But there are many people who just grew up as a real minority. Like, I was talking to Jason, and he grew up in Red Deer. So he was like, a small handful of people. And he lives in Boston now and works there. So, but when he came to Toronto, he never fathomed the number of Asians and how diverse and how he fit in as a community. So it's very interesting when you grow up in community, which I have. I feel very Canadian, and I feel very Chinese, and I find that uniqueness blend that I feel comfortable in my community. Whereas if I had been in a situation where I truly was a minority, I might feel different. But having said that, in my high school there was like five of us. Three of them were my brothers and two other Asians, and I guess I'm comfortable in that situation. In that, in fact, when it's been reversed, where I'm more of a sameness in the community, I felt odd for the first few years when that was, and now where I live is very, very Asian community. But it is part of what we are and who we are.
Yeah.
How we could talk all day, but this is about sharing self confidence, and it doesn't matter if you're Asian or not. The two of us happen to be Asian, but I hope that a lot of you got a sense of how to build your confidence. How do people get a hold of you and your book as well?
Yeah, for sure. So people can check out my website, sheenayapchan.com. I have a free quiz to unlock your self-confidence personality. You can get a copy of my book, The Tao of Self Confidence, on Amazon, at Indigo, Barnes and Nobles, and most big book retailers. And if you're in the GTA area, there might be some signed copies at certain Indigo locations that you can get a copy of. That would be great for a Christmas gift as well if you're looking for ideas. But yeah, other than that, if you forgot anything that I mentioned, I'm literally the only Sheena Yap Chan on the internet, so just Google my name.
This has been an amazing, amazing session, and I really want to thank you for coming on and giving us a snapshot of Sheena Yap Chan Part 2, because the journey from Part 1 to Part 2 has been amazing, and I revel in your success.
Thank you so much, Hilda. And it's always, I'm always grateful to have you as a friend and as a support system, and grateful again to be here today.
Oh, I just enjoy our relationship, and I thank you again for coming on. For those of you who have taken the time to listen to Sheena, put a thumbs up, comment and like it. And there are so many journeys of people and their tips and strategies. So subscribe to Rev Up Your Business Success. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for tuning in to Rev Up Your Business with Hilda Gann. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify to stay up to date with all of our latest episodes. For more HR tips, strategies, and to learn how you can create a people-centric workplace, visit our website at peoplebrightconsulting.com.